to reduce the sentence for rape at all.
Ken Clarke, the Justice Secretary there, speaking to Nick Robinson. Let's talk to our chief political correspondent, Laura Koonsberg, about this now. Because, Laura, Ken Clarke there saying he hadn't been told by anyone to apologise, that he wasn't apologising. But do you think he has been lent on by Downing Street to do this latest interview, clarifying at least his earlier remarks?
Oh, I think it's pretty clear that from after Prime Minister's questions when this storm was all brewing over Westminster, that Number 10 were very keen that Ken Clarke be seen to clarify his remarks and be seen to be clear that his view, as everyone in government's view, is really that any rape is considered a very serious crime and that they do not have any intention of watering down the kind of punishments that would be meted out to convicted rapists. So whether or not he denies that he was ordered to go out and apologise, which of course in a sense he did not apologise, in some ways it was a classic non-apology apology, but I think certainly Downing Street has had a hand in the events of the last couple of hours. But in a way I think one of the really interesting things about this in the bigger political picture is that for some time Labour have sensed that there's potentially a political opportunity for them to attack the coalition on issues around law and order. Partly that is because Ken Clarke, who's a liberal conservative, if you like, is the man who's in charge at the Department for Justice. And that is one of the reasons why earlier today Ed Miliband was very keen to make as much of this as possible when he, perhaps unusually, had David Cameron on the back foot at Prime Minister's questions.
The Prime Minister, when he leaves this chamber, should go and look at the comments of the Justice Secretary. And let me just say to him very clearly, the Justice Secretary should not be in his post at the end of today. Now, that's the first thing he should do. The second thing he should do is he has to do is to drop this policy. Because this policy that they are defending is the idea that if you plead guilty to rape, you get your sentence halved. That could mean the rapists spend as little as 15 months in prison. That is not an acceptable policy, and the Prime Minister should drop it.
Now, Downing Street, following that exchange, were also absolutely at pains to say that policy that Ed Miliband was outlining there is not yet something that the government has adopted. It is not yet something that is planned to be written into law. And I think that on this very sensitive area, it will be something on which the government wants to proceed very, very carefully. Now, again, another interesting thing about this is the senior people at the top of government have to some extent signed up to the idea of reforming sentencing in this way. But what they don't want to do while they're making moves in that direction is get caught up in these kinds of tangles on such sensitive issues around law and order as has happened today. And that perhaps will be the lesson for them as they go forward in terms of looking at this really complex and really sensitive issue of changing the law, is that if they're going to do that, they really have to get the language right. And even Conservative MPs today are just saying that Ken Clarke's language on this was not well chosen.
And Ed Miliband saying in the comments there that he shouldn't be in his post by the end of today, but will he be? I mean, what are Downing Street saying about his future?
Well, at the risk of making a prediction that might turn out to be untrue, at this sense, there isn't a sense of gathering momentum, of gathering steam that Ken Clarke is suddenly going to be forced out of his job. Now, this has been a very fast-moving story through the day, but at the moment, Downing Street sources are saying that he will survive, and there's not a question of that at this time. But again, there are Conservative backbenchers who've been nervous about him being in the job, who have been making suggestions for a while on the fringes of government that people might feel happier if someone else was in that job. But again, in a bigger sense, David Cameron is very reluctant to look at doing any kind of reshuffle given the complications of the coalition. And also it's something that in opposition he said again and again he didn't want to do on a regular basis.
OK, Laura, thanks very much.
Well, let's discuss some of this a little bit further with Lisa Longstaff from Women Against Rape, an organisation offering support, legal advocacy and information as well to rape victims. And she joins us from our central London studio. Afternoon to you. This story has sort of been changing all afternoon, morning, and I'm not sure if you heard that latest interview with Ken Clarke when he makes it very clear all rape is a serious crime. Are you glad to hear him say that?
Well, yes. I mean, it's about time. It's outrageous, some of the statements he's been making today. Including that average sentences looked bad because some of them include an 18-year-old boy who has consenting sex with his 15-year-old girlfriend. I think it's very, very outrageous to be mixing up consenting sex with rape. It's a very serious crime, and any move like the Tories are proposing to give rapists shorter sentences is going to incur the wrath of women. We've been campaigning to get rape taken seriously and appropriate sentences applied for decades. In fact, we first began because a guardsman was not given a prison sentence after being found guilty because they didn't want to harm his promising army career.
OK, he also goes on to say in the latest interview as well, he's very clear there will be no change to the sentencing for rape, despite what's been said today.
Yes, but they're talking about wanting to reduce the numbers of people in prison. If that's the case, why are they targeting violent criminals? Why aren't they looking at the 70% of prisoners who are there for non-violent offences? Why aren't they looking at the women, 66% of whom are mothers in prison? And why aren't they looking at children who, as young as age 10, are being put in prison? And I'm sorry, but the Labour Party has a lot of responsibility to bear, because under their policies, many more people have been thrown into prison, wrongly. Why aren't they looking at women who are sex workers who are being raided and put in prison?
Let's talk specifically about what the proposals were today, which would be that there could be a reduction, and it wasn't just specific to rape, actually, a reduction of 50% for an early admission of guilt. Would that help rape victims if, as Justice Secretary Kenneth Clarke said, they didn't have to, for example, go through the trauma of giving evidence? Would it help?
Look, some women don't want to go to court. Partly, women do not want to go to court because it's such an ordeal, because the woman is often put on trial. We're grilled about our sexual history, which is against the law. Our whole character is trashed, and, you know, it's a very scary thing. First of all, to report, it's a horrendous experience, and it stays with you for the rest of your life, both the rape itself and what happens to you afterwards, because so many obstacles to justice are put in your way. And these proposals are only adding to that, you know, to that horrendous way that women are being treated.
So in your view, it wouldn't help then?
No, it wouldn't help at all. In fact, it's a slap in the face. It's really an awful proposal, and women are absolutely outraged at the proposals to let out rapists even earlier. Given, you know, some rapists are just given cautions. It's completely outrageous. Meanwhile, women who are accused of false allegations are being put in prison for 2 or 3 years.
And one of the many issues that there are with rape is the low conviction rates. Do you think that in any way the proposals could help at all with that?
No, I think that's a completely false argument. What they need to be looking at is how the rapes are being investigated, how they're being prosecuted. And, you know, there are many complaints about how that is happening, and those should be taken seriously. And if officers are not doing their job properly, or prosecutors are not doing their prosecution job properly, they should be sacked.
Lisa Longstaff from Women Against Rape, thanks for talking to us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just an update on that from Downing Street. We're just hearing from the Prime Minister's official spokesman that the Prime Minister saying that the Prime Minister would think that if people had been offended by Ken Clarke's comments, then that is, quote, clearly regrettable. Asked if the Prime Minister had confidence in the Justice Secretary, he said that he did, and then questioned further, the spokesman said there were some misconceptions about what had been said, but, quote, the Prime Minister has not spent the day watching Ken Clarke interviews.
Then it goes on, he declined to say whether the Prime Minister had spoken to Ken Clarke, but he said that David Cameron thought that it was important, as did the Justice Secretary, that the Justice Secretary went out and clarified that position. And that interview with Nick Robinson in the last half an hour or so, we've had it in the last half an hour or so, the Justice Secretary saying all rape is a serious crime and there will be no change to the sentencing for rape.